As of 2013, the pet food industry was dominated by only 5 multi-conglomerate companies. Yet when a consumer walks into a store, it's easy to assume that there is a vast array of choices for their dog or cat, and the ability to choose that one perfect food. But just how different are these choices? And what's really going on inside of those bags? Is what's inside really as healthy as the shiny outside labeling would have you believe?
My name is Karen Becker, and I'm an integrative veterinarian here in Bourbonnais, Illinois. This is a commercially available raw food diet. This is lamb. I'm also going to give the boys an egg. Great source of protein. Is it feeding time, Bernard? And that's dinner. Oh my, what time is it? What time is it? It's very exciting. Okay, Ada, what time is it? So there's a problem in the pet food industry, and most pet owners aren't aware that there's a problem. And unless you have an interest in digging deeper and finding out what those issues are, you can go through your whole life feeding the exact same food, assuming what you're doing is healthful for your pet. And once you start digging, the evidence becomes overwhelming that the industry has significant issues.
The human-animal relationship is deeply embedded in our society. It is estimated that 80 million dogs are in the United States, with 96 million cats. Americans alone spend an estimated $60 billion on pet expenses every year, and that number is growing exponentially. It's always a first thought to buy something your pet will like, something that will make them happy and live a healthy life. We give them exercise, clean water, and lots of love. We've always purchased food from a grocery store or a pet food store that provided convenience, the promise of nutrition, and familiarity with the brand.
A very important part of this champion's diet is meat. That's why we feed him Friskies.
It's a complete diet in just the right amount. Very convenient.
The industry at large survived for nearly 100 years without a single thought from consumers as to what was going into the pet foods. That all changed in 2007 when a toxic ingredient made its way into pet foods, killing thousands of pets nationwide.
Melamine is used as a fertilizer in Asia and also has several industrial commercial uses, including a component of kitchen utensils and plates. The association between melamine in the kidneys and urine of cats that died and the melamine that was in the food they consumed is undeniable. Additionally, melamine is an ingredient that should not be in pet food at any level.
Following the 2007 recall, one central question began to resonate amongst consumers. What are dogs and cats actually supposed to eat?
It's confusing because the pet food industry is telling us what to feed our pets, really more based on what they want to sell us than what's necessarily good for the pet.
She is Oprah Winfrey's veterinarian and now an author, and her new book is called The Royal Treatment. Please welcome Dr. Barbara Royal. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being here. So let me ask you this. What are the things that we're giving them that we shouldn't? And then what should we be giving them that we aren't?
So no corn, no wheat, no soy.
After many years of R&D, we have found that corn is still the best available source of carbohydrates when processed and refined properly.
Those are the things that cause overweight, diabetes, arthritis, chronic skin infections, allergies, things like that. That's the precursor for a lot of that. If you're feeding poor nutrition and they're eating a lot of those things that mess with the body, they just don't stay healthy.
But let me ask you this, doctor. Are those the things that you find in dog food, or you're talking to people who are giving table food to them?
No, it's in dog food. During the war, there was a moratorium on using the metal cans for canned food. So they said you can't use metal cans for dog food anymore. You have to use that for ammunition. So somebody said we need to make the dog food something we could put in a paper bag. And that's how they did it. And nobody thought at that time that making a kibble, and eventually the way that we process it now, could ever be a health detriment to the dog. Now, because of the way that the world is, corn and wheat have become so subsidized and so cheap. It's a super cheap way to make a food for somebody who can't say no.
That is just too snug. She needs to get on her diet, change her food, and then she can do it. Trouble if you can just get a sling.
There's definitely an epidemic of problems now in animals that I don't think we've seen anything like it in history. Every animal that comes in to see me, they'll say, oh, they're basically healthy, but the list of problems is immense. So it's not that they're healthy, they're actually suffering from many, many maladies. A lot of the same maladies that we see in people. We have animals that have, diabetes and arthritis. They have autoimmune disorders. They've got allergies. And part of the reason for that is because we are actually creating these problems. It's a huge epidemic of problems. All of them, I believe, can be linked to a very simple problem of diet. I would say I rarely get home before 8. There are days when I stop appointments at 3, just so I might make it home by 6. I would like to not work this late. I would like to not work this hard. I don't see any way around it right now. I know my family would like me home more. My daughter said to me, Mommy, when you're done writing this book and doing this conference, could you not do another one? I know, I'm interesting. I know, I smell like all those animals. They do not hurt each other ever. They've been doing this for 12 years. Do you look 12 years old? No, you don't look 12 years old. Do you know why you don't look 12 years old? Because your parents feed you excellent food. Duck necks. Yes, it's your dinner time? It's supper time? And then eventually, I figure out my own dinner. Let's see if he wants a little legs to come out for some of it. You put this down and they're just like arrows just right on it. Absolutely the best thing they can imagine. And they're so excited about eating. And it's gone. There's nothing better than making your animals happy. I gotta say, look how happy they are. They're both like, yes, thank you. You're feeding me the thing I love. And they're so happy. And do I worry about them eating raw food and then licking me? No, I do not. Because the fact is, there aren't any pathogens in that raw food. But they're careful with it. I think raw food is weird to a lot of people. When I first mention it to people, they sort of say, raw food? Do I have to feed raw food to make my dog healthy? Like, are you crazy? I'm like, well, no, you don't have to. It'll make a difference. It'll make a huge difference. When we had so much crazy processed food, and then all of a sudden Whole Foods came around and said, we're going to offer fresh food. It's going to cost a little more, but you're going to like it. And everyone said, no one's ever going to do that. No one's ever going to spend so much more money on food than, and it's like, guess what? Yes, they will. Yes, we will. Because we know, we can feel it. I can feel it. And now I think we've come to the point of saying, okay, we know they do care. It does make a difference. And the species appropriate diet is getting back to what it was before we started, leaving the canned foods and stuff.
Dogs and cats have at least, hopefully, a wonderful, loving, caring owner, but Mother Nature doesn't. And so when animals become injured, they're on their own. They usually starve or die of secondary infection, unless they happen to meet up with a wildlife rehabilitator. So this is the red-tailed hawk. He was hit by a car and has a broken wing. One of my hobbies and passions is wildlife rehabilitation. This is Cordelia's pouch. Cordelia, are you a sleepy girl? I have been fascinated with nature and life since I can remember. I became a licensed wildlife rehabilitator when I was 14, and I knew that I would have a lifelong career helping animals. So when I was 14, I heard about a woman that had tremendous success with wildlife rehabilitation. Her name was Barbara Harvey, and she was in Horicon, Wisconsin, and I called her and I said, Barbara, my name is Karen Becker, and I'm 14 years old, and I want to know how you became so successful. A long story short, she invited me to her home in Horicon, Wisconsin. She lives in a beautiful log cabin during the winter months, and she lives in a teepee on 13 acres during the summer months. She invited me to live in her teepee on her 13 acres and see how she rehabilitates hawks, eagles, owls, and falcons. Barbara has the best success rate in the country with raptors. And the reason she has such a success, she feeds biologically appropriate, raw, living mice, rabbits, rodents to those animals to be able to help the body recover from injury. So when I went to veterinary school years later, and I sat through these nutrition courses, and when they gave me the laminated chart that told me what food I should feed with what disease process, things did not add up.
Before I went to vet school, I worked for years in zoo medicine. The most important thing I think I've learned from that is every species has its own requirement. Each species must eat what it is supposed to eat. It's developed, evolved to have a specific diet that keeps it healthy.
Each animal has its own biologic requirement for certain nutrients. A species-appropriate diet for worms is dirt. A species-appropriate diet, let's say for hummingbirds, would be nectar. You can't feed earthworms nectar and you can't feed hummingbirds dirt. Both of those animals would simply die. Some species, when you offer them not biologically appropriate foods, they simply won't consume them. When you offer a snake, another obligate carnivore, a salad, they will simply starve to death. They will not consume a non-biologically appropriate food in light of sustaining life. They simply die. It gets pretty confusing with dogs and cats, however, because dogs and cats are nutritionally much more resilient than other species. And what that means is that we can nutritionally abuse them, for lack of a better term, and they don't die immediately. They just have overall vitality decline and overall degenerative changes take place in their bodies from feeding them foods that are not biologically appropriate. Cats, being obligate carnivores, have to consume meat to be able to thrive. They do not have a biologic requirement for any type of carbohydrate. They have a very high protein requirement, a very high moisture requirement, and a moderate fat requirement. Cats originally we thought were domesticated to guard the granaries because cats don't consume grain. Cats consume mice that consume the grain, and so by domesticating cats, we assumed that there was a mutually beneficial relationship. We do know in the last 100 years, since we have produced cat foods on the market, that cats have experienced significantly more kidney disease, and we know that they have experienced obesity, organ failure, and diabetes at a much higher rate, and certainly we need to begin evaluating what role nutrition has in some of those degenerative diseases. Kidney disease is the #1 killer of cats, and we know that asking cats to process an entirely dehydrated food, such as kibble, can be very detrimental to kidney health. Dogs evolved from the gray wolf, and we know that dogs came phylogenetically out of the order Carnivora, which means they're carnivores. In 1993, the International Society of Zoologic Nomenclature redefined Canis lupus familiaris as just Canis lupus. These are the people that define what category, what taxonomy animals fit into and why. This society concluded that dogs were genetically identical to wolves. They shared 99.9% of the DNA. We know that genotypically, the genotype, the DNA is identical. What has changed over the last 200 to 400 years is the phenotype. Phenotype is the jacket, which is what pets look like. We have bald dogs, dogs with white fluffy hair, blue eyes, dogs with crazy tufts of hair on their body and no hair anywhere else, speckled dogs, short-legged dogs, double-coated dogs. We've created these fantastic varieties of breeds because we like diversity in what we see. Despite the fact that we have bred dogs to have certain characteristics, we have not bred out of them their Canis lupus DNA. So yes, just as you can have brown hair, blonde hair, or you can have blue eyes, green eyes, brown eyes, your nutritional requirements as a human being remain the same, despite the fact that you look vastly different depending on what your DNA dictates.
One of the biggest problems with the pet food industry is there has been very poor research done into what actually is appropriate and isn't appropriate. There isn't anybody that's really minding the store and saying, here, we really know that this is needed for pet food.
The major companies criticize raw diets, warning consumers against the hazards of feeding raw meat to pets, claiming it can make your animals sick. However, those companies who repeatedly criticize feeding raw diet have yet to produce a single study to provide any substantial evidence to support their claims.
The problem with the types of research studies that you are describing, they would go at least 7 to 8 to 10 years in length before you would get a definitive answer. Within our legal requirements and frameworks, it's not FDA's responsibility to do such studies.
The research has not been done on raw foods, not because there isn't an interest, but because the $1 million it takes to fund that particular research simply isn't there. Now, integrative veterinarians are working on that, but traditional veterinarians will say, until we see the research, we're not interested in recommending this particular food for dog and cat owners. We just don't believe it's safe and healthy. The frustration is that we don't have clinically proven research demonstrating that dry and canned foods are wildly helpful for pets as well.
The larger corporations are not very interested in proving or disproving the value of their food because they're already making $1 billion on it, and there's no reason to do that research.
Since major pet food companies are involved with and have influence over vet students, lack of education surrounding raw diets exists heavily among traditional vets.
When clients come to veterinarians who have not been educated about raw foods at all and say, I'm considering feeding my pets raw meat, of course the logical conclusion is, why?
There's a lot of bacteria in the raw diets, and it's kind of a ticking time clock.
Or you could harm them, or why would you do that, or it's risky.
I think raw food has too much of a potential for negative side effects that it's just not worth it.
People's biggest question is there could be pathogens or bacteria, parasites within the food that could cause illness to pets.
When dogs eat raw diets, their feces, their poop, has a lot of bacteria.
Let's talk about eating shit. Dogs, if given the opportunity, will eat poop. We tend to look the other way when dogs do this. Dogs lick their butts. Dogs do a variety of behaviors that if humans or other animals were to do it, we would die. Dogs and cats, being carnivores, are equipped to be able to process their evolutionary food source, which is raw meat. all of their digestion has acclimated and has evolved to be able to process whole, living, unadulterated protein. So from ripping and tearing, their dentition is set up to be able to process meat. Their stomach acid is very acidic, in fact, a pH of 1, which is highly acidic. That stomach acid is in place to be able to neutralize pathogens or potential harmful bacteria that could be present in the food.
From the outside, the pet food industry looks like the perfect industry. There are beautiful packages. There are diets for every disease and disorder. There's all kinds of different colors and beautiful pictures. And if you look a little deeper, unfortunately, that isn't what the pet food industry is all about.
It's more difficult than you would imagine. At first you think, I'll just stop by the store, waltz right in, and buy my pet some food. You walk in. You browse. The lighting persuades you. The music speeds you up. The pretty pictures slow you down. In this moment, you officially surrender to the overwhelming realization that you have no idea what the real difference is between all these bags. And if you're being totally honest with yourself, you've probably never even read the ingredients of a pet food label in your life.
So it becomes very difficult to go into any store and discern a great product from a terrible product. It becomes confusing for a lot of people. The labeling is beautiful, the packaging is great, there's some keywords that look pretty good and sound pretty good, so it becomes nearly impossible if you don't have background experience or some training to be able to know what would be a good choice and what would be a bad choice. I've collected a few examples here, and we're going to go over some labels. My first example is a food that on the front says bistro meals. Thoughtfully prepared, bursting with flavor. Who doesn't want that in a pet food? First ingredient is corn. Second ingredient is soybean meal. Third ingredient is beef and bone meal. Fourth ingredient is ground wheat, followed by animal fat preserved with BHA. We can stop there. BHA is a toxic preservative that should not be found in any human or pet foods, despite the fact that it is. The first three ingredients are carbohydrates that are totally unnecessary, followed by a totally toxic preservative. So, cute bag, not up to par. Next, we have a food that has won actually several packaging awards because it's so beautiful. There are chunks of meat falling from the sky and a beautiful ear of corn. Here we have a nice array of radioactive colors that have been added in. For you, the consumer, dogs and cats cannot see all these different colors. This is added in because you think, my gosh, it looks beautiful. My pet would love it. But the amazing buzzwords like playful life, what pet owner doesn't want their pet to have a playful life? This is just entirely marketing. First ingredient, ground yellow corn, totally biologically unnecessary. Second ingredient, chicken byproduct meal, totally rendered and inappropriate in terms of quality to be nourishing your dog with. Third ingredient, corn gluten meal, very allergenic, totally unnecessary. Fourth ingredient, whole wheat flour, and then animal fat. Although this food really looks to be beautiful and something you'd be interested in nourishing your pet with, my recommendation is to avoid it. Over here, they have a special little tagline, OptiHealth with prebiotic fiber. There's a lot of these patented words or trademarked words that companies will use to help kind of discern their product having something special included as a means of you coming back and buying it because other brands that you're comparing it to doesn't have the OptiHealth included. So good marketing on that behalf. This particular food is fabulous quality if you were a goat. When you add up organic brown rice, organic oats, organic millet, organic barley, organic grain sorghum, organic peas, organic potatoes, that portion of the ingredients in this particular food doesn't outweigh the organic chicken or the chicken meal. Healthy, really, what are you supposed to say? Unhealthy? The worst possible food, in my opinion, you could ever feed your dog because number one ingredient, beef byproduct, soy grits, high fructose corn syrup.
What is byproduct? Byproduct is what's left over after an animal has been slaughtered and all the edible parts have been removed. The criticism lies in the mystery of the meats being used. What is quality? Quality is a term used when discussing how good or bad the raw material that goes into the food actually is. Whether this protein comes from diseased animals, euthanized animals, roadkill, human food waste, or processing, the industry doesn't have to disclose the source of the ingredients. that doesn't prevent them from easily proclaiming that every ounce of their pet food is of the highest quality.
The issue is on the back of the dog and cat food bag, it doesn't say rendered terrible quality protein. It doesn't say that. We also can't list legally grade A USDA inspected meat. So this leaves this giant gap for the consumer to have to fill in that void, and it's wildly confusing.
The controversy with kibble exists because dry food is void of moisture. When your animal eats dry food, they're put in a permanent state of dehydration. The quality and sourcing of where the ingredients came from is kept secret. And even if the ingredients were perfect, the manufacturing process to make a meat product shelf stable for extended periods is performed at extremely high temperatures. This creates two potent carcinogens, heterocyclic and acrylamides. However, most companies do not disclose to the consumer what temperature their foods are cooked at, and they act as if the trace amounts of carcinogens pose no threat. It was around 1948 when veterinarian Mark Morris decided to create the first prescription pet food, still recognizable today. At the time, Mark Morris was critical of pet foods for lacking quality ingredients, and he wanted to make a superior product backed by scientific research. He teamed up with canning manufacturer Burton Hill to fulfill his vision. The result became what we know today as Science Diet, sold in veterinarian offices all across the country. But in 2013, the Wall Street Journal reported Hill's was starting to see its profits decline because consumers no longer identified with their ingredients. Science Diet has since refocused on rebranding their image as more natural, creating new product lines and shying away from controversial and rendered ingredients. The National Renders Association argues that they're providing a necessary role when it comes to the recycling of animal carcasses. If there wasn't anywhere to put the animal waste from the human food industry, where would it go? In the earth? In the air? In the ocean? It all has to go somewhere.
We have a huge quality control problem, meaning the quality of ingredients coming into the industry, anything from potentially fabulous USDA inspected human grade, all the way down to entirely rendered, which is every piece and part you could ever imagine and actually probably don't even want to think about.
The final result is used to manufacture hundreds of products, everything from soap to candles to pet food to cosmetics.
Pet food manufacturers get their raw ingredients from a variety of sources. Ingredients can be leftovers from the human food processing plants, leftovers from slaughterhouses or ranchers and farmers that have had animals die. Those industry leftovers and dead animals are collected by rendering facilities. Pet food companies blend these recycled ingredients together with synthetic vitamins and minerals to create a profitable, quote, complete and balanced diet that is then marketed to pet lovers.
I'll tell you a story you'll never forget. A story about you and your cigarette. Enjoy smoother smoking, choose wisely, choose well. Smoke longer and finer and milder pell-mell. Pell-mell.
So the pet food industry today is similar to the tobacco industry in the 40s and 50s when you had medical doctors recommend the use of tobacco, not because it was conspiracy or they believed that they were in any way harming, they just didn't know.
Tens of thousands of doctors, general practitioners, surgeons, specialists, doctors in every branch of medicine were included.
Very similar, in my opinion, to what's happening in the pet food industry. You have well-meaning, lovely veterinarians recommending foods not because they have sound nutritional background, but because that's all that they know. And in 100 years' time, we have successfully convinced an entire generation of pet lovers that why would you feed anything but dog food or cat food?
Looking at the rules that guide the pet food industry, it's easy to see how they are set up to benefit the corporations over the consumer. The regulators have created special terminology for packages, assuming that consumers would be able to guess what they mean. Any product containing the words dinner, nugget, or formula only have to contain 25% actual meat. Any product labeled with only has to contain 3% meat. Furthermore, the so-called flavor rule allows for any protein to be listed on the back. It may be flavored as meat, but in reality, a bag that contains the word flavor may contain little to no meat. By using the keyword flavor on the package, the pet food could, but does not have to contain any meat at all, but it's acceptable for the package to contain an image of a fresh steak. Ingredient panels do display protein percentages, but protein percentages do not represent actual meat content in the product, as protein can come from a multitude of sources. This raises the question if the average consumer knows that the terminology used on packages reveal the exact amounts of meats used in foods. Trying to understand who exactly makes these rules and what their actual legal authority is leads to many different organizations.
The Association of American Feed Control Officials is a non-governmental organization. They have a model bill that sets the standards in terms of ingredients, nutrient levels, package labeling in terms of ingredients as well, for pet food companies to abide by.
Each year, members of AFCO come together to update their official publication, which defines each ingredient that's allowed to go into pet food. Members of the major pet food companies attend the meetings as well, allowing their voice to be heard when it comes to what goes into pet foods. So, who is AFCO?
I think if you look at our websites, we have some very clear statements about the fact that AFCO is not a regulatory organization in itself. That's one thing important. The second is that AFCO doesn't approve products. What we do is we deal with the ingredients and the scientific validation, if you will, of the ingredients that go into the food. And then the actual claim that a manufacturer makes that it's AFCO approved is probably not representing what AFCO itself would say.
It's a gathering of sheriffs. They're there just to get agreement on the best level of nutrition that can be required.
FDA has worked closely with AFCO on the regulation of all animal feeds, not just pet food. I think the important thing to remember is FDA is a true regulatory authority, where AFCO is an association of state feed control officials. And as such, AFCO has no regulatory authority.
If you meet the nutrient level for protein, it makes no difference whether that protein comes from a healthy protein source like chicken, or whether it comes from a base protein source like wheat flour or wheat gluten that's been fortified with protein of some kind. As long as you meet the nutrient levels that they've set, the food is approved as AFCO approved. When you look at the AFCO manual, I think you really begin to see how the interests of AFCO and the pet food industry align. Actually putting together a list of ingredients that you would want to see in pet foods that you would want your pets to eat, and then forcing that on the industry. They've done it in reverse and basically just accepted the standards that the industry has been using for years.
And I'm quoting now, use of the term or claim natural on pet food labels. So if I want to use the word natural on my dog food label, here are the rules, and I'm quoting this verbatim. A feed or ingredient derived solely from plant, animal, or mind sources, either in its unprocessed state or having been subject to physical processing, heat processing, rendering, purification, extraction, etc. It goes on. And essentially, these are all definitions of the antithesis of natural. All consumers would assume that if their dog food said the word natural on it, that what's in it would not be a rendered product.
They're meeting the industry standards and the industry regulations that they've promulgated themselves. So it's a vicious circle of they create their own regulations, they meet their own regulations, and then they can claim that they're providing you organic and all natural foods when in fact it doesn't meet what consumers believe, those terms actually mean, but it does meet what the industry has defined them as.
The definition of the word and the use of the term organic must have 3% organic chicken and at least 67% other organic ingredients. Could contain non-organic chicken meal or non-organic chicken fat.
This is not an independent organization that is regulated by the FDA or USDA. This is not the government overseeing safe and adequate food sources for dogs and cats. This is a self-regulated industry setting their own requirements and then letting dog and cat food manufacturers know that if they're interested in having the food be labeled as nutritionally adequate, they need to adhere to their standards that they have put in place themselves. So the FDA's primary role is in regulation of what the label says is in there is actually in there. The FDA is not regulating quality, production, sourcing, any of those things. They're regulating that what you say is on the label is actually on the label.
The most shocking thing about the pet food industry that has remained since basically I started doing this work is the FDA compliance policies. I still cannot understand how an industry is provided by a federal tax-supported organization loopholes to avoid federal law. If you go to the FDA website and just type in compliance policies, and then scroll down the page to animal feed. And there's one after another. They allow contamination by pesticides, contamination by industrial chemicals, contamination by natural toxins, contamination by filth, microbiological contamination, overtolerance, or unpermitted drug residues. It's incredible. The law says that can't be, but the compliance policy says, don't worry. Go ahead, we won't enforce the law.
The reforms that need to be done in the pet food industry are not done. There are some steps that I've seen. People seem to be interested. I've had a lot of FDA, you talk to the FDA and they're like, we really want to fix this. But the fact is, it's pet food. And who has the time? And who has the money, really? I mean, we've got bigger fish to fry right now.
For all practical purposes, there's nobody looking out for the average dog.
In 2006, a mystery illness began to sicken thousands of pets across the United States and Canada, thrusting the industry into the spotlight like never before.
Okay, everyone is so freaked out about this recall. Tell us, what do people need to know about this recall?
Well, so it's menu food.
Menu foods. Menu foods.
Menu foods. Oh, menu foods.
On March 16, 2007, Menu Foods began recalling dog foods produced in their facilities in Kansas and New Jersey.
What disturbs me about this incident is that it confirms yet again that pet food as well as human food is at risk.
More than 60 million packages were taken off store shelves last month because they apparently contained wheat gluten that was tainted with the chemical melamine.
When the recall was announced, nobody knew what the problem was.
Veterinary offices are getting flooded with phone calls from concerned pet owners. Do the people on the other end of the phone sound worried?
Yes, very worried, yes. No official estimates on exactly how many have died so far, but hundreds of pets have suffered.
My strong belief is that they were intentionally delaying.
The recall happened because they thought they were purchasing a certain protein product called wheat gluten that has actually a pretty high protein count, when in fact they were buying wheat flour that had been laced with cyanuric acid and melamine in order to pass it off as wheat gluten. The way they test protein sources is to do this, to check the level of hydrogen in it, and both cyanuric acid and melamine have high levels of hydrogen. So they just would inject the wheat flour with these poisons and then pass it off as wheat gluten. And the reason they were doing that is that wheat gluten costs a lot more per protein count per ton than wheat flour.
When the wheat gluten got into menu food system, it infiltrated all this other pet food.
That's when hundreds of pets got sick or died from eating the food made by Menu Foods. That company makes dog and cat food under 90 brand names.
In 2007, pet owners didn't have any idea that one manufacturer, Menu Foods, made hundreds of different varieties of food. That was a betrayal of trust to so many pet owners.
This is leading people to wonder at this point, what can we safely feed our pets? Do we need more, I hate to say this, regulation of pet food, more inspection or some way to get to the bottom of this?
Purina tonight is recalling a batch of its Purina One dog food.
A warning tonight to check the food you are feeding your pet. Many vets are reporting that they are seeing pets getting sick from recalled dog food, food that should have been taken off store shelves months ago.
I remember it vividly. I was sitting in my little office. I got a call out of the blue from a woman named Don Majerzak. who told me that she wanted to bring a lawsuit against the entire pet food industry.
They knew they had contaminated food. They knew it was poison. They knew it killed animals, and they continued to sell it and put it on the market. I mean, you just don't do that. But it's a money market. They were making money, and I wanted it stopped.
CBS News has learned the tainted wheat gluten used in pet food was human grade, meaning nothing but luck kept it from being used in the food people eat too.
The most shocking aspect discovered in 2 subcommittee hearings was that the ingredient used in the pet foods that was responsible for killing the animals was actually legal to use in human foods. On top of that, the FDA admitted that there was no penalty given to a company if they failed to notify the FDA in a reasonable amount of time. In this case, Menu Foods faced criticism for failing to notify the FDA for over 3 weeks, even after they confirmed dogs and cats were dying and they knew the cause. But other than complain about the ethics, no one in a government position could fine Menu Foods for allowing the food to continue to be sold, even though they knew animals would die as a result. But Menu Foods would not testify.
The lobby group that came in its place was left to explain why Menu supposedly knew tests were making animals sick on February 20th, but didn't tell the FDA until 3 weeks later.
Wait a minute. Let's get the record straight. Menu waited more than 3 weeks after finding out that the dogs wouldn't eat their food and were getting sick. They waited 3 weeks.
I don't have the facts on Menu, Senator. I think
before you came to the hearing, you would have the facts.
But on the industry side, they were still maintaining that they were highly regulated, though the evidence exposed by the recall appeared to confirm the fear that the industry wasn't regulated very much.
Pet foods are indeed a highly regulated product. They are perhaps the most regulated product on the supermarket shelf.
Mr. Nelson was very clear in his statement that AAFCO has no regulatory authority. We've been told by the FDA that there is no pre-market approval of this product sold to consumers. We know that there's no regular inspection of the facilities that make these products. What we are told is that 30% of these facilities will be inspected once or twice over a 3.5-year period. We know that there is no government authority to recall a contaminated product. We know that there was no mandatory state inspection standards established by the Food and Drug Administration across the United States. We know that the claims being made on the label here about this dog food are beyond the claims that can be made about human food. And we're told, at least Dr. Hodgkins has told us, that it's questionable as to whether or not a company that makes a contaminated pet food has to report to anyone about adverse events in a timely fashion, whether a dog has died or dogs are dying. When I go through that long list of things, it's hard to conclude this is a highly regulated product.
But in terms of having another outbreak in terms of the scale of 2007, I really think that our pets are the canaries in the coal mine, so to speak. The only way we'll know is when our pets start to get sick again.
We're still having recalls. We're having chicken jerky that's killing thousands of pets. We can't identify the source of the contaminant that's still killing pets. That's scary.
After the 2007 recall, another mysterious illness began to plague dogs all across the country. It was soon discovered that consumers who purchased various brands of chicken jerky treats to reward their dogs were actually poisoning their pets instead. Owners were devastated to find their dogs either sick or dead after consuming these so-called treats.
We went to PetSmart, and my wife was looking at the treat aisle there, and she saw dehydrated jerky chicken treats. And she's like, well, why don't we try these? This is the only thing I see is just in chicken. So I agreed, and we brought it home and we fed it, and didn't take long before we saw big changes.
And what stands out in my mind from buying them that day is that I looked at the bag and they appeared wholesome. They really had this almost organic, good for you feel about the packaging. And so we grabbed 3 packages. It was around Christmas time that we bought them, and we put them all in the stockings for the dogs. So I remember getting them because they looked so good for the dogs.
We believe your dog deserves treats made with the same quality of ingredients and care that you want with your food. created by people who love dogs. No artificial colors, no artificial flavors or fillers. And the list ingredient is very short. The packaging just looks like looks like they've put a lot of thought into it, and it looks like they care about their animals. It looks like it's real food and nothing artificial. And there's just a kitchen home-style dog. So you just would lend you to think that it's healthy, or it's more natural. It's like a jerky that almost looks like human jerky.
While Callie was at the vet, I knew that she had eaten the Milo's treats. So while she was there, I went online and I started researching. And I was sick to find that there was just this huge amount of information about these chicken jerky treats. It was Milo's, it was Canyon Creek, it was Wagon Train. There were dead dogs, there were dying dogs, dogs with just crazy problems from them.
The American companies selling the chicken jerky were all sourcing their treats from one single manufacturing facility in China, even though they were labeled and sold as several different brands, a practice known as white labeling. Over a span of years, the companies involved strongly denied that their products were causing any such harm, even though thousands of complaints were pouring in from their consumers.
Since 2007, the FDA has extensively tested many brands of chicken jerky treats, including ours. That testing has identified no contaminants and no definitive cause linking these products to reported illnesses in dogs.
In the initial stages of backlash, companies tried to get consumers to sign non-disclosure agreements, which would have barred consumers from legally speaking about the death of their pets. A way to silence the very victims this had happened to, Del Monte offered money in exchange for signatures, but their bribery backfired. Offended pet owners refused the money, even banding together on a Facebook page to share their stories and information to try and get the products recalled from the store shelves.
And when I came down in the morning, I checked on her, and she was breathing and she was sleeping. And I went upstairs to take a shower, and I heard her food bowl go across the floor. And I go, oh, Callie's up. And I took a shower, and then I came back downstairs, and she was dead.
This is that fast. Yep.
Went to move her.
There was blood everywhere. She had been bleeding out of her chest, and her mouth opened, and she was bleeding out of her mouth and her nose. It was the most horrible thing I've ever seen.
Well, I lifted her up, and my hand was just covered.
So when I called Del Monte, I received a woman at I presume their call center, and it was almost scripted, her response to me.
Any reports out there with dogs becoming sick or dying or anything from our Milos, the FDA did step in. They did extensive amount of testing. They did a 17-step process, in reference to our treats. There has not to this day been any link to any of those reports that consumers put on the internet, nor has there been any contaminants found. That's why they are still on the market today as we speak, and we do stand behind the product. Dogs can get sick from any new treat, any type of food that's new to them, as far as, death or anything like that. Like I said, anything that has ever been reported, the FDA did step in, and there's never been any contaminants or any link to any of those illnesses with a treat.
It was crystal clear that the products were not coming off the shelf anytime soon. So my next call was to my local ABC station.
Rachel Chambers of Morgan Hill lost her dog Callie yesterday morning. She says it was a sudden and painful death.
The vet found that she died after her stomach twisted and ruptured, but it remains undetermined what caused that to happen.
According to the FDA, nearly 1,000 pet owners have complained about this product.
Despite the FDA warnings, the treats are still on shelves at Target, Walmart, Costco, Petco, and PetSmart.
And admittedly, it's somewhat frustrating because we haven't been able to find a problem with the product. We say, yes, there are sick animals, We believe there's strong evidence that's associated with it, but when we go look at the product, and we've tested for numerous things, and we haven't been able to find anything that would suggest that this product right here, there's a problem with.
Sometimes toxic ingredients are a combination of things. Sometimes a toxic ingredient, is when you mix this with that, and then that creates the problem. So if you're looking for just one thing, it's hard to know what that is.
The chicken jerky issue lasted until 2013, nearly 6 years after the first complaints were made. Upon investigation, the New York State Department of Agriculture discovered illegal traces of antibiotics in the treats. Even though it couldn't be proven that the antibiotics had directly caused the deaths of the pets, it was a technical adulterant needed for the State Department to force these companies to withdraw the products in question from the shelves.
The trace amounts of antibiotic residue found in these samples are not linked to the FDA's ongoing investigation of chicken jerky products. And again, the trace amounts of antibiotic residue do not pose a health or pet safety risk.
It has damaged my trust. I don't trust companies anymore. They don't care about me. They care about my money. And that's a terrible thing.
When death or sickness is involved, the cards appear to be stacked against consumers. This is because, according to the United States government, your beloved companion is considered property that is worth little to no monetary value.
It's very difficult to put a value on companion animals. The courts have struggled with this. Where it really comes down to a struggle is what are the damages to somebody who has had a pet that's been injured or killed. For the most part, they're still considered a piece of property. Most courts are willing to just do the quickest possible analysis, which is, what did you pay for the animal? How much did you suffer in terms of veterinarian bills or that kind of thing in terms of caring for the animal? And, that's what you're able to recover rather than the sort of emotional connection that you have with the animal or that kind of thing.
In 2015, government agencies value human life between $6 and $9 million to provide some leverage to consumers in the unfortunate case that injury or death were to occur. In contrast, within the pet food world, no such evaluation exists. Even in the largest of class action lawsuits, the money awarded to victims whose pets have been directly harmed by pet food is insignificant when compared to the massive profits that companies make each year. So as far as profits are involved, there is no incentive for companies to do what consumers believe is the right thing.
I'm Sebastian Gay. I'm the father of a theory of economic valuation of companion animals.
Providing an economic valuation for companion animals creates a formula which can then be used to fairly evaluate the worth of a dog or cat.
The main problem in the valuation of companion animals was the discrepancy that existed between the true value of a companion animal that veterinarians were giving you in case something happened to them, and the amount of money that people were spending on their companion animals.
If settlements like the one in 2007 were not in the millions, but instead in the hundreds of millions, that alone would be a game changer for corporations, who would be under serious pressure to prevent recalls at all costs.
I don't think the playing field has entirely changed, but it might soon. It takes a big case, I think, to really change everything.
I'm Susan Thixton, and I run the website truthaboutpetfood.com. I started teaching people about pet food before the website began. About 20 years ago, my own dog, almost overnight, we noticed a tumor on her pelvic bone. Took her to the vet, and he told me that it was a chemical preservative in the pet food was more than likely, this was bone cancer. And this chemical preservative in the food was more than likely the cause of the cancer. And, my brain couldn't wrap my head around that. How could a food that I trusted, and this was the leading food in the United States at the time, how could a food cause cancer and kill my dog? And he said it was to extend the shelf life. Well, back then I barely knew what shelf life was, but I called this pet food manufacturer just to confirm, because I was really doubting my own vet, and asked them what the shelf life was of this particular dog food. And what they told me literally changed my life. Their exact words, which are seared into my brain, where the shelf life, the pet food would stay fresh for 25 years. There was that many chemicals in the food that the food would stay fresh for more than 3 times longer than my dog lived. When you have a dog or a cat that pet food kills, your own pet, and you poured that food in their bowl, so you feel really responsible, it is life-altering. Weekly, if not daily, I hear from other pet owners that were in the same exact boat as me. That's what keeps you going. I'm very optimistic that the more awareness will bring about change. I think the big players, big pet food, will still be there, just like McDonald's is still serving up food. However, pets eat that McDonald's every single day. So it's very important for pet owners to be aware more than fast food purchasers. But as McDonald's has stayed in business, health food, smaller stores have also grown, if not even more rapidly. And I believe the same thing is happening right now in the pet food industry. Big pet food is still there, but a lot of small, very health-conscious companies are growing very rapidly and gaining a lot of customers.
This is an interesting quandary for the dry food industry because they have to do one of two things. They either have to come up with more information to be able to bash the raw food industry, or the second option is they have to listen to what clients are asking for, which means really educated clients are going to the veterinarian saying, I want to see meat first on the label. I don't want to see extra carbohydrates. I want to see no additional fillers, preservatives, or unnecessary ingredients on the label. So some of these pet foods have wisely decided to join the bandwagon.
Wolves, the wild ancestors of your dog.
Using the same brash marketing style that the major pet food companies established, one company would soon challenge the industry's obsessive use and stance on grain.
Feed your dog's wolf spirit with Blue Wilderness.
In their commercials, Blue Buffalo took a bold step, questioning ingredients.
I compare the ingredients and lots of them.
Corn gluten meal? Not too sure exactly what that is.
This style of marketing worked, quickly catapulting Blue Buffalo into a billion-dollar brand.
All Blue Life Protection foods are made with the finest natural ingredients and start with real meat.
As they say, you know you've made it when you're parodied on Saturday Night Live.
Ground yellow corn chicken byproduct meal? The thing that gets me is like, what kind of person thinks it's okay to put a big drawing of a chicken on the front of the bag and yet there's no chicken in there? You know, what other compromises can we make? You want to have sex with my husband? Bend over, Pat. They want to get that ass.
No.
But one company wasn't seeing the humor.
Purina and Blue Buffalo are locked in a nasty battle, and it's all about what's inside those bags of dog and cat food.
Some people will try to tell you that your dog is a carnivore and requires only a diet of meat. They may tell you your dog is like a wolf, but even a wolf's diet is built on more than just meat.
Blue Buffalo claims its pet food is free of chicken and poultry byproducts. The suit alleges testing at an independent lab found significant percentages of poultry byproduct meal in Blue Buffalo's top-selling life protection products.
Purina sued Blue Buffalo for false advertising, eventually leading to a class action lawsuit. Purina launched a website called Pet Food Honesty. The irony of the entire lawsuit, however, was Purina's own lack of transparency when it came to their own products. They refused to answer questions on camera about the quality or source of their own ingredients.
Since you guys are suing Blue Buffalo for transparency and ingredients, I just wanted to give you guys an opportunity to talk to this film and the consumers about the transparency of your own ingredients.
Okay. All right, I will pass this along.
After Purina failed to respond to our request, we tried again.
So you don't have an idea of a date whenever you guys would like to respond?
Well, it will not be me responding, so I am not sure. It's kind of up to, when he will respond.
He officially has it.
He does have the information.
Purina would not defend their own alleged lack of true transparency. We reached out to Blue Buffalo as well, who also refused to go on camera. If this really was about transparency and honesty, why was no one talking?
A one-on-one interview with the heads of these major pet food manufacturers would never happen because you can ask questions that are too difficult to answer honestly, openly, or appropriately that could put them in a compromised position.
But the market for premium food is growing the fastest, with more pet parents seeking nutritious and natural food for their dogs. And with American pet owners expected to spend nearly $23 billion this year on food for these treasured members of the family, the stakes are high.
Some of these companies that have repeatedly said it's not a problem to feed wheat or corn are now coming out with grain-free foods that they are labeling as more species appropriate or biologically correct or grain-free, where previously they have acknowledged that there was not a reason to produce these foods. They're now, all of them, coming out with a grain-free food, really, I believe, to compete in a marketplace that's becoming more competitive. At the American Holistic Veterinary Medical Association annual conference, we have all of these great food suppliers that are there, not only discussing their products, but exchanging ideas. Everyone's very open. Veterinarians are capable of going from booth to booth to get an idea of what the products are about, how they're manufactured, ingredient lists. The owners of these small pet food companies are passionate, wildly passionate about the products that they're producing, and they're eager to speak with you, and they want you to know more, and they want you to ask questions. Some of the big pet manufacturing companies have acquired a booth at these conventions. And although they're there, I guess, representing themselves, there is no discussion.
The fact that veterinarians come around and are looking at stuff, and this is how we get information, and it's sort of cool. Like, for example, I've never looked at this bag before, and I want to find out what's in it, because that's the kind of person I am. So your stuff usually is on the side, right. Pull this out of here. So you've got, this one has barley in it? This one has barley?
Right, there's ideal balance and there's ideal balance. There's two products under the umbrella.
How are you finding your
Industry leaders are incredibly cautious about making sure that every time that they are publicly on tape or have any printed information, it's a well-calculated, formulated response that they're in control of. Do I think that the top pet food manufacturers in this country could be striving to produce a more species-appropriate, better quality pet food? Sure. Do I think that their motive is probably more economic and trying to maintain their market share than producing a fabulous quality pet food? I do.
Most companies that attended the trade show were happy to speak with our cameras, proud to show off their products in transparency. But when we revisited the Science Diet booth with our questions about the species appropriateness of their products and the sourcing of their diets, we were refused interviews and instructed to contact their media department team. So we did.
Hi, Cole. This is Lucia Rubio with Hills Pet Nutrition. I just wanted to let you know that Hills decided not to participate in this documentary.
All other major pet food brands also flat out refused or ignored multiple requests to participate in this film. All over the world, independent pet stores are now offering a solution to the growing population of concerned pet owners. For almost their entire existence, major pet food stores only carry dry or canned food, while independent stores were adequately addressing the concerns of their customers by selling raw, dehydrated, or alternative diets.
The big box pet stores are recognizing that there's not only a market for human-grade, species-appropriate foods, but there are pet lovers going and asking for these foods.
The industry has felt the threat of the independent pet stores popping up across the nation. In reaction, they've launched their own chain of smaller stores with the appearance that what they're offering is healthier. So many well-intentioned customers are still left wondering, what is the right thing to do?
So you're talking to people, I'm doing this thing, and they want, okay, so what is the answer? So to me, that's what happens to me every day. I've got people who come to me and say, what is the answer? In the end, it isn't about perfect. It's just about knowing. I just happen to see increased health when you really can feed a biologically appropriate diet. We shouldn't have strayed so far from it in the first place. We have. We're going to have to get back there eventually. I'd like to see that.
I believe as pet guardians, our job is to feed the best possible food that we can afford to feed. So if you can't afford to feed an organic, all raw, biologically appropriate diet, then my recommendation is to make that your goal. Consider feeding as much raw, balanced, human-grade food as you can. Maybe you could use it as snacks throughout the day, or maybe you could afford to feed one meal a day. The other meal you could consider feeding a dehydrated raw or a canned food. By default, and because it's least biologically appropriate, I only recommend feeding dry food unless you can't afford to feed better quality foods. And many people cannot afford to feed better quality foods. So even within your dry food choices, there are better quality dry food choices and there are terrible quality dry food choices. And it's your job as a pet guardian to be able to know enough about nutrition to make wise health decisions for your pets.
Rest assured, the industry will continue to evolve, much like a chameleon in the wild. No matter what product is shelved before you, understand that every company, as well as their packaging, is doing its best to convince you that they have the utmost integrity and that their products are of the highest of quality. The industry and the ingredients in most products on the shelves boil down to the ease of convenience, money, and creative labeling. You're never going to meet that farmer on the package, tour the pet food manufacturing plant where your dog's gourmet food is being made, or shake the hand of that CEO. It's all just too big. With profits as their main goal, the cycle will continue on, again and again, with no end in sight.